This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Ryder back again with episode 76 of the Geek Leader podcast. And today on the show, I've got Bobby Allen. He serves as the CTO at CloudGenera. He's also the stewardship pastor at Wellspring Church. So we're going to talk a little bit about how where he marries those two environments together and how some of the things that he's learned by volunteering and serving at his church has benefited him in being the CTO at CloudGenera. It's a really good conversation. We talk a lot about leadership and a lot about transparency and some other things. Time management is another big one that we talk about in this episode. So with all that being said, give it up for Bobby Allen.
Sure. Well, John, first off, thank you for having me on the program. It's a privilege to be here. I hope that we can provide some things that will be helpful to your listeners. So my current role is as Chief Technology Officer and Chief Evangelist at CloudGenera, which is a cloud analytics startup based in Charlotte, North Carolina. We were actually recognized as Charlotte Startup of the Year in 2015. Our CEO was recognized as IT Entrepreneur of the Year in 2016. And we were named the fifth fastest growing private company in Charlotte this past year by the Charlotte Business Journal. So we're very thankful to be there. One cool thing about CloudGenera is that everyone there has a superhero persona. So our CEO is actually Iron Man / Tony Stark, and I'm Captain America. So everybody kind of has a different persona. One of the things that I guess I'm really thankful for, too, at our company is that we're big on servant leadership. And it's funny because even the way the Avengers are kind of structured, you know, in some ways Captain America will lead, sometimes Iron Man will lead. They kind of do what's best in the situation. And I have to give a lot of credit to our CEO because there are not a lot of people that would let someone else kind of be the face of the company. And so getting to work with a guy who's a humble leader like that, and I want to give a shout out to Brian Kelly, our CEO, who's someone I think is definitely a leader worth following, who's willing to defer to someone else at times and say, you know, Cap, you call out the play. What are we going to do this time? So sometimes I'll lead in certain things in terms of field and technology strategy. Sometimes he'll lead, and we just try to do the right thing for the company. And so the way I actually got here, oddly enough, was interesting. So I went to undergrad in computer science, grew up in Maryland, actually went to school with my wife. Interesting story. So undergrad and grad school, I was essentially competing with my wife, and we both did computer science undergrad and then computer science and engineering in grad school. So undergrad went to UMBC. That was the little known school that knocked off UVA in the NCAA tournament this past year in the first round, and then went to Michigan for grad school. And then after that, after being an Intel fellow at Michigan, where they actually funded fellowships for my wife and I to finish school there, I actually went out to work for Intel for a while, did some time in an Intel startup, and then ended up relocating to Charlotte in about 2005. Worked for Intel remotely for a year, then spent time at Bank of America and TIA before getting recruited into the world of startups. And so I've been doing cloud computing startups for the past 6.5 years or so, including a startup that was acquired by DXC, the former CSC. And so got to see a lot of things in corporate America, small companies. And so I've been really blessed to experience a bunch of different things, right? Being a cog in the wheel of 200,000+ people, and being in a smaller company where the CEO called me directly to say, we got to get this deal done, do whatever it takes.
Okay. So. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So being in a startup, I can imagine that just consumes a whole bunch of your time. And I know I've started my own business, you know, back, it's been a long time now, but I ran a web hosting and development company back in 1999 through 2007, I believe it was, is when I sold out, got out of that because it was just so consuming. How has it been for you as far as managing your time with some of the other things that you do?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you an honest answer on this one, John. This is interesting. So a startup is not just an 8 to 5 job. So if that's what you're looking for, a startup is not for you. I mean, there are times where I'm on early, I'm on late, I'm on weekends at times, but it's not because I'm forced to do that. I really do like what I'm doing. I really like the people that I work with. I feel like we're adding value to customers. But this is what I got challenged with, John. At a startup, I have lots of autonomy at our company. That's something that Brian has set up as a leadership culture, especially for folks like me in the CTO spot. I can kind of decide essentially when I work, when I travel, when I go to the office, when I work from home. And so what I had to come to grips with is if I'm a workaholic, that's on me. I can't blame that on the company because it's not a function of the culture. We're very family friendly. Brian and the leadership team respect the fact that I'm a pastor and have some outside commitments. But I've got to be the one to set my own boundaries to decide when to actually turn it off, when to disconnect, and when I need to step away. And so one of the things that's big for me, I think one of the ways that we even connected online, there was an article I wrote that I think you tapped into, New Leadership for a New Year. And one of the first points in that is just being present. And so for me, the challenge is it is a startup, but that's not an excuse for me to not be present in all the other roles in my life. And so what I've had to try to internalize the most is that there are other leaders at my company. There are other pastors at my church, but my kids have one father. My wife has one husband. If I don't do those roles well, if I'm not present in those things, then that impacts everything else that I do. So I've had to do some self-reflection that some of the times that I've been working too much is because maybe I was making my work more important than it needed to be, right? Not that I don't want to do well and try to be excellent, but sometimes I was using that as an excuse to not be present in other areas of my life. So it kind of caused me to reprioritize some things.
Yeah, I had that moment that hit me. It was right after my daughter was born. I have 3 kids, and my daughter's my oldest. Before that, I was working, all the time. It seemed like I wouldn't get home from work till 7 o'clock, and I was there before 8, almost every day, and on call, on a rotation. And not really because I was a manager at the time, so I wasn't having to be on call, but I was choosing to kind of to set an example for my team. And I got to that point where, I wasn't being effective. I wasn't making the impact that I wanted to, and I was definitely affecting my home life. So one day I just went into my boss and just said, hey, when I get home, I am going to turn off my phone. I'm not going to answer any emails. I'm not going to answer any phone calls until my daughter goes to bed around 8:30. And after she goes to bed, I'll jump online if I need to. But if it's not urgent, I'm not going to jump online anymore. I'm not going to just knock things out to knock things out. I want to wait. And if there's a problem with that, I need to know about it. And he just looked at me and says, no, there's no problem. He's like, and if there is a problem, we'll work through it.
Right.
It's kind of one of those things where I never set that boundary. I never put that line up. And I just kind of assumed that was probably going to get me fired, having that conversation. But it didn't. He was so open to it and so, flexible with it. And, that changed my life because it freed up so much time. And I actually found out that when I was at work, because I knew I had a limited amount of time to work, I focused better and I got more done than just doing those side conversations and not really, working.
Yeah, it keeps you focused. It makes you use the time more effectively. I agree.
And like
100%.
your article said, it made me present.
I agree 100%. I think it's, one thing that I would recommend to a lot of people that are married, John, is to just really check in with your spouse and to do that in a way that's really genuine and transparent. So, I heard a pastor talk about a leadership conference one time, and this is for folks in ministry, folks in the corporate world, folks in the startup world. Ask your wife, how often do you have my undivided attention? And then just be quiet. Don't be defensive. Don't make excuses for all the other things you have to do. Listen and take it. And if she has some things that she needs to say to you that are kind of hard truths about when you're not present or when you're, giving all in. My wife and I have a very, very transparent relationship, and we talk to each other very openly. We laugh and joke and talk a lot. And so when I know that I need to tune things up, my wife will say, I feel like CloudGenera is getting rock star, but I'm not getting rock star at home, brother. We have that kind of relationship where she can say that to me. And I'm like, you know what, baby, you're right. I'm not being present. Work has kind of just flooded my mind too much. And we've grown to the point, we'll be married 20 years next August. We've grown to the point where she can say things like that now. And I don't take it as being defensive. We're on the same team. And that actually helps make me a better leader. Yeah.
And I think what you're getting there is self-awareness. It's one of those things you can't see yourself the way that the ones closest to you can see you. And asking those questions and being open and just sitting there, like you said, and taking it gives you what they're actually seeing from you and gives you that self-awareness that you're not getting anywhere else.
Right. Exactly.
So, after, getting started with the startup and growing it, how is that, or how have you seen the spillover into, being a pastor and having to lead, people at your church? I know there's other pastors there that do things as well. How do those things kind of correlate and work together? Or how does maybe your faith build on what you do as a leader in the technology world?
Yeah, I actually love that question, John. Thank you for posing that. So I think there are a couple things. So number one, I get to kind of walk out what it looks like to juggle, a secular job, if you will, with being very committed to my church and to ministry there. I also practically get to use a lot of my skills from the corporate world in the church. So as stewardship pastor, I'm responsible for finances, technology, and facilities. So right now we're in a school, but we recently bought a building. So managing things like bids and the construction process and permitting with the city. So my kind of core competency as a project manager in the corporate world translates well into a lot of those initiatives we try to get done. And so one of the things that I'm big on, I've had the opportunity to go talk to students at UNCC at places like Crew and InterVarsity Fellowship. And one of the things I mention to them all the time is that God doesn't just need people that are in quote unquote full-time ministry or quote unquote missionaries. He needs people that are engineers and lawyers and doctors and accountants and project managers and all those things that God put in you for the corporate world, he can use for the kingdom. And what I find is that there are things that I do in the corporate world that make me better on the church side and vice versa. I remember when I worked at Bank of America and I was dealing with some of the challenges we had financially with time cards and time tracking and things like that. And one of the leaders there reached out to me and said, this is really hard. And I said, this is challenging in a way, but this is really all paper money. I said, what's actually hard is taking people that don't have to give you anything. That's all voluntary income and having to manage a church's finances. That's difficult. And she said, interesting. You want a job? They created a role for me based on the experience I had on the church side. So I think that part has been beneficial just to realize that God can use both of those things. But in my role in cloud computing, so here's the thing that's interesting, because people often ask me a lot, and I use analogies and examples and illustrations a lot, which are things I do in the pulpit and I do on the cloud computing side. So I talk about cartoons and real estate and commercials and mix that in as I'm talking about cloud computing. And folks will ask me, like, how do you do that? Well, because God has gifted me to talk about the Bible. So being able to illustrate things like cloud computing, the principles are I want to make sure that my audience understands it and that I'm not talking over their head. And that if I really understand in technology, it's not about using big words, it's about connecting with them. But what's interesting is people will often challenge me, how can you be a technology guy and be a faith guy? And I say cloud computing is built on faith. The reality is you're never going to see the inside of an Amazon data center. You don't know where that photo went that you uploaded. Everyone who touches cloud computing, which is essentially everything today, is using faith. They just don't know it. We're all exercising faith when we do technology now. There are apps that are running in one place and you've got a device somewhere else. And so to me, I'm just drawing out things that we're already banking on. So I choose to put my faith in a person, in Jesus Christ, not just saying it in AWS, $1 trillion company. So very adjacent spaces.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's what you said about faith in cloud computing is spot on. I always tell people, when you put something in the cloud, you're putting it on someone else's computer that you just have to trust that they, are going to manage it correctly. And, and it's good to have that good relationship with that company that you're trusting, basically.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And I also found out like there's so many things that you can bring from, a nonprofit perspective into a for-profit business. It just changes your perspective and the way you look at things. And it's been helpful for me. I know as I've volunteered and helped out at churches and at other nonprofits, to take some of that experience and take it into work. And I can't tell you how many podcast episodes I've stolen from my pastor as far as like titles, nice. Pieces of information that, is so beneficial, from a religious perspective, or, but you can take that same kind of thing and apply it to work.
Agreed.
One of the things that you've talked about is transparency. How can a leader be transparent with their team, but also, be confidential? How does that work?
How to be transparent with your team, but also be confidential?
Yeah, because sometimes you can't tell them everything,
Agreed.
So how is it that you balance that line of saying, hey, I'm transparent with you, I'm going to be real with you, I'm going to be open with you, but I can't tell you everything.
I mean, I think some of it comes down to just being consistent, right? Character still matters, integrity still matters, and so you don't want to be one way with one person and another way with another. But there are times where you want to contextualize maybe how much detail you give. There's some folks that can handle the fact that we're about to run out of money in 2 weeks. And there are other people that would be a distraction for. So you don't lie, you be integral, but I do think you need to think about what is most helpful to those individuals that you're talking with so that you can motivate them, that you can encourage them, that you can make sure that they kind of have everything they need to succeed. And so I do think you have to think about the audience, not just the message when you talk to people. I think the other part about transparency and confidentiality is often I think the line of confidentiality is not crossed with you as a manager. It's really crossed when you talk about maybe those things that really were not yours to share. So something that's happening with someone on your team. So if you're having a one-on-one with someone and they reveal something in confidence, you got to keep that in confidence. And I think if there are difficult things that you need to talk about, I often will try to draw things out about me, right? Where these are some things these are challenges that I'm having or struggles that I'm having. This is my information to be able to share. And so I'll tell you a story about a time when I worked at Bank of America. So we had a case there where there was just one of those death march type projects where, everybody was burned out and the team was just really tired. And I had, I think, 15 or 16 direct reports on 3 or 4 different continents. Everybody's globally distributed. It was really difficult. And so at that time, I brought the team together and I said, this is my plan. So I set up a SharePoint calendar and I said, this is what we're going to do. I know you all are burned out. You're tired. We still have a long way to go. I said a couple things we need to establish. Number one, we have to make sure that you don't assume the bank is going to bribe you enough to pay for all the time you're sacrificing. So don't subject every personal goal and sacrifice that for a company, assuming that they're gonna make that trued up at the end of the year with money. That's not going to happen. So we need to try to take some control of things. So I said, this is what you're going to do with this calendar. You're going to put all the personal events on here that are non-negotiable for you. The PTA meeting, the anniversary, the birthday, those trips, you're going to put those things on here. You're going to talk to your significant other. And I'm giving you permission to do that because if you don't do that, your spouse or your significant other is going to feel like they hate your job because they can't stand me, because they think I'm not giving you permission to do that. And the funny part about that, John, and I'll come back around to the confidentiality part in a second, is that there were people that were so freed up because what they did is they went and had conversations for the first time in a year and a half or so about what are the things that I need to be here for that really matter. Because what I coach them on is it is difficult to be passionate and effective about your job when your spouse doesn't like your job because it's sucking you away from everything that matters to them. They need to feel like they have some access to tell you, I need you to be here for this, and be confident that you're going to make that happen. And I said, this is what's going to happen on the team. When person X needs to be away for an anniversary, everybody else is going to cover for them. And then when it's your time, we're going to cover for you. And across the board, when I started having one-on-ones with people, the things that came out were amazing. My wife's sister comes over from the UK once a year, and I was going to miss it. But in light of what you shared in the team meeting, I would love to be offered that, the week before Thanksgiving. Can I do that? Absolutely. You need to do that. Your wife deserves that. Let the team know we will cover for you. Now, the other thing that I did at that time was 2 things, tactically and 1 strategically. Tactically, I told the team, I don't have time to meet with 16 of you every single week. We'll have official one-on-ones every other week, and then I'm essentially going to have office hours. Because your issue is not how often you can get me, is whether you can get me when you need me. On top of that, I said, and that was the time where I didn't yet have my PMP, I said, you all need to see me struggle to do something in front of you. So I'm going to get my PMP in the midst of this crazy project, trying to manage 16 people with my own deliverables. You're going to see me struggle to try to do something that I'm telling you to do. Because I coached all of them. You need to pick a personal goal and pursue that in the midst of all the things we're doing at work. Lose weight, run a triathlon, do a 5K, spend more time with your spouse. Well, mine is getting my PMP. And you're going to see me block off time to study. You're going to see me struggle for it. You're going to see me take the test. You're going to see me come back and tell you if I passed or not. So part of my transparency was I needed to have individual conversations with each of those employees, but I needed to live out for them what I was talking for them to do. I needed to block off time for my wife and my kids and my church. I needed to block off study time. And there were folks on that team that honestly said, you're the best manager I've ever had. And I say that humbly because I don't think that I did anything other than try to give them what they needed. And when they did that, they all performed phenomenally and made significant progress on things outside of work, which made them more effective at work.
Yeah, I think you said something really important there about, they needed to see you do what you were asking them to do.
Right.
And I've worked from good bosses and bad bosses, and I've had some bad bosses who would ask us to do things that they wouldn't do themselves. And I think a good leader always does what they're going to ask someone else to do for them.
Exactly.
And I think that was really good for you to make sure you showed that. And not only just did it, but you called it to their attention so that it was clear that, hey, I'm going to be doing some things and I'm going to be blocking some time off, and you can do the same. You can block some time off, and you can make time for the things that you're doing that are important. And it's also really important what you said about you've got to have a happy home life to have a happy work life.
Yeah.
And putting focus on that. I think so many people don't put that perspective on things, and that's one of the things that I try to never talk about problems that I have at work at home. Because I don't want to bring the badness. That's at every job. There's always something bad. I don't want to bring that into the home. The home's a place that's more important than work.
I agree.
Find another job, but I can't get another home.
And we definitely don't want to start that. I'll tell you part of what fixed that for me, John. So when my wife was expecting our first kid, again, my wife and I joke back and forth, but I find her humor kind of humbling at times, but also encouraging. So I was talking about all these meetings I had. I think I was working at the bank at that time. I had all these meetings and all these deadlines, and I said, "Well, how was your day?" And so again, she's carrying my daughter at the time. She said, I sat on the couch most of the day, but, I'm growing eyebrows, growing a brain, growing a set of lungs, growing a heart. I said, so in other words, you did more sitting on the couch because there's a life inside you than I did all day. She said, well, if you needed to hear it that way, then, take it as you want to. And it's just humbling to realize that, it didn't revolve all around SharePoint sites and calendar invites. She's literally grown. And there's still times I look at my wife today and I say, there are two people that came out of you. I just can't compete with that.
You're right.
I can't.
Yeah, my wife says something very similar to me. When she was pregnant with our first kid, I was training for a marathon, and I got back running, and I ran 12, 14 miles or something that day, and I was exhausted. That was after work, and I come home, and I sit down, and it's I am just exhausted. And she's like, why are you exhausted? I grew a heart today.
Exactly.
I just said, yep.
Exactly.
I can't compete. I'm done.
Yeah, I think the thing, too, John, that I find for people of faith and for people in technology, sometimes we just take ourselves too seriously. We have to be able to laugh at ourselves and realize that, someone can be poking fun at you who still loves you. And if we can't be self-aware enough to know that, this person's on my team, we're laughing about this together, then we're going to miss a whole lot of opportunities to reflect on how much people are willing to give us that kind of feedback. And someone who loves us enough to give us that feedback in kind of a joking manner, that's a gift. And so many of us, especially as men, take that defensively because you're not patting me on the back and elevating my platform. One of the things I try to tell folks, and I don't know that we'll have time to talk about this, but I think it's very important to be a mentor and to be willing to be mentored. One of the things I try to tell some of the folks that I mentor is you've got to be willing to pick people that can not just encourage what you can do, but who you are, that can build your character, not just your talent. And some of those things where my wife is checking in with me and giving me some of those lighthearted moments encourage me from a character perspective, not just an ability perspective, and that's invaluable.
So what do you think is most important about having a mentor? What's kind of a story or something that you've gained from either being a mentor or having a mentor that you would like to share?
I think I'll share, I think there are three relationships that you should have when you think about mentoring. So a pastor friend of mine actually took this example from the New Testament. Everybody needs to have a Paul, a Timothy, and a Barnabas in their life at all times, ideally. So you need to have someone who you're following behind, someone like a Paul who's kind of pouring into you, who's further down the road. You should have someone like a Timothy who's kind of coming up behind you. So you're doing something to share with that person transparently. This is how I've messed up. These are things that if I had a chance to do it over again, that I would, and I want to give you that opportunity. And then you need to have a person like a Barnabas who's kind of a peer, who's kind of tracking on the journey with you. Maybe that's the person you sit at lunch with who's encouraging you, man. How much time are you spending with your wife? You really haven't disconnected a lot lately. When are you going on vacation? And I had a mentor, a gentleman like that for me, and I'm going to call him out by name, Tim Atwell. He's an executive at Bank of America, phenomenal man. He's a believer, leads very well respected. And he challenged me on some things I was frustrated with at work. He challenged me on, taking vacation time with my family. And, I'll be honest, there were some things that happened in the organization that I was a little frustrated about. And he just put it to me directly. He said, this time is your fault. He said, if we're having the same conversation the next time you're in my office, that's your fault. You know where things are now. And if you don't do something about it, then that's on you. And I love the fact that he challenged me on that, but he was also talking to me about, taking vacation time with my family. And it's funny the way God worked it, John. As we had that conversation, come to find out, we both ended up taking our families to Orlando, Florida at the same time to go to Disney World the week before Christmas. Our families actually went out to dinner together in Orlando because we were both didn't even plan it. So it was definitely God ordained for me to connect with him. So I definitely appreciate his coaching at that time to kind of it's part of what motivated me to look at the world of startups, actually.
So how hard was it to hear that it was your fault?
It was, it wasn't difficult to hear because I kind of gave him permission to do that. And that's part of what I think it means to have a mentor. You need to look at someone who you trust, again, not just their ability, but their character, so that you can receive hard truth from them. If you're not willing to do that, they're not a real mentor for you. They're a fan. Yep. And you don't want someone who's just going to pat you on the back and elevate you because of the things you did well. You need someone to say, I know what the crowd saw, but this is what I saw, or this is something I want you to think about. And there's a lot of transparency. I mean, even, being present is actually something that I picked up from Tim. That was one of the things that we talked about in one of our mentoring sessions. And the part that's funny about that is I would argue that, Tim and I have almost a circular relationship, because there are times where if he were on this podcast, he might say there are times that I mentor him in some things spiritually, and he's mentored me in some things career-wise. So we very much try to support each other that way. And that's another thing I think to consider, is that there are times where there could be different mentors you have in different eras of your life. I want to pick this mentor because I really love the way they love their wife. And I want to treat my spouse this way. I want to raise my kids this way. But I may have a different mentor when it comes to a career path, or when it comes to managing money, or when it comes to real estate investing. I think the key is that I don't let ability trump character or integrity, that the skill set shouldn't compromise my values and my non-negotiables, but there could be different strengths that different mentors have in my life. So again, Paul's, Timothy's, and Barnabas's should be always people that we're looking for, and that we really think about kind of investing in people to give them our best and to show them our mistakes, right? I did my best here, but that wasn't my best. This is what I could have done differently. This is how I want to save you from some of the heartaches that, my wife went through. I think this will bless your wife if you do this. Just take this advice humbly and consider doing this a different way.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I know I've had a mentor, and I've been mentors for others, and I've had a very similar experience to what you had with your mentor, where at that time I had I think 5 or 6 direct reports, and I had two openings that I was hiring for, and I had 2 contract to hires in those positions, and I thought things were going great, and they both quit on the same day.
Wow!
And and it was kind of unexpected. Just one came in my office and said, "Hey," and his contract was up for renewal, and he's like, "Hey, I'm not going to renew my contract. I want today to be my last day." I was like, what? I was kind of just blown away. And it wasn't an hour later that the other guy came in and just said, I think I'm done. I just can't do this.
Wow.
I had no idea, And I went and talked to my mentor, and I told him kind of what was going on. And he just said, and I kept saying, well, it's probably because we were in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is just south of Charlotte. And in Rock Hill, you mentioned in Charlotte, you mentioned Bank of America. And there's some other banks up there that pay, more than what our company was paying at the time for software developers. And I said, well, it's always because the banks are, paying more money, and that's why these people are leaving. And he goes, I don't think so. So well, what do you think it is? He's like, I think it's you. I was just like, what?
Wow.
And he kind of gave me this eye-opening experience about how leadership and people quit their bosses. They don't quit their jobs per se. And you need to focus on that. And, I learned a lot from that. That was kind of my awakening to leadership in general. But after maybe a year or two of him being my mentor, we were at lunch one day, and he's like, I think I learned more from you than you've learned from me. And I don't know why he thought that or why he thinks that. I never really dug into it. But after I took on a mentor or a mentee, and I was a mentor for a while, I kind of got what he was saying. I learned a lot just by being there for someone, and I could see things from their perspective that I kind of forgot. I forgot when I wasn't a manager what it was like to be, led by someone.
Right.
And it's just one of those things that I saw. I really liked your quote that you said, don't let your ability compromise your integrity. I think that's super important for people to realize and think about.
Yeah, thank you.
So what are some things that you have, some tips or advice that you would have for new leaders? A lot of our audience are team leads or software developers or engineers that want to be leaders or managers someday. What are some advice that you have for them to help them out with their career?
Some advice that I have is, think about where you want to go. So actually, let me get tactical for a second. Yeah. I would say when you're in a position, you need to think about whether you want your boss's job or their boss's job. If you don't want your boss's job, you probably shouldn't be there, because reward probably looks like you get in that next rung up the ladder. And if that's not something you see yourself doing, then you're probably wasting time in a situation that's not going to play out for you well. So we need to be thinking about kind of the next move and the next move after that. And you don't want to get to the point where they are rewarding you with what they think is kind of a good reward for good behavior and performing well. And you say, well, no, I had no intention. I would question, why are you there? If it's not getting you to the next rung of where you want to go, maybe that's because, the pay is great or the opportunity is great, but the work-life balance is going to be terrible. Then you should find something where the next progression or two up are things that you would at least consider. That's number one. Number two, I want to make sure that people don't get distracted by the size of platform. Social media just totally messes this up. There are a bunch of faithful, effective, consistent people that don't have a huge platform. And everyone who does have a huge platform is not the most effective in what they do. It's kind of like the old church thing. Everyone who's on American Idol is not the best singer in the world. There are folks in little old country churches that will blow them off the stage. And I think the principle for that is don't associate likes and followers with effectiveness. There are people that are little known, that are humble, that are in different pockets of the world. So basically, if you evaluate whether someone is worth listening to by the size of their platform, you're going to miss some great advice. And what I try to do personally, and what I try to encourage other people to do, and I mentioned this in one of my articles, is be excellent no matter the size of your platform. If folks are giving you their time, you owe them your best, period. So my big thing is, and this is what I hope people kind of take away from some of this, is the best way to be successful when everybody knows your name is to start being faithful when nobody knows your name. When they go back and look at you later, years down the road, and say, what has this person been like? They see a track record of consistency, of showing up, of trying to knock it out of the park, not somebody who kind of mailed it in because there weren't enough people there. Did you give your best? If you show up, you need to bring your A game. If you're not willing to do that, then you're probably not ready for the next level.
I think that's 100% right. And I know you do speaking, and I've done speaking as well. When you're going to give a talk, you need to give that talk, whether there's 10 people in the audience or 200 people in the audience, you need to give it as passionate and as good as you can do for that 10 as you would for that 200.
Exactly.
And if you ever get to the point where you're not excited to talk to 10 people, then you probably shouldn't be speaking.
Agreed.
And I did that with this podcast. When we started out, we had no listeners. It was just me talking to a mic, and I published it. I didn't think anybody would listen. And, for the first several episodes, I really didn't have anybody listen, and it grows over time. And I think that's one of those testaments that when you do put in your effort, you can't get that growth if that's what you're looking for without putting in the effort. But you got to do it when there's nobody there. You got to do it when nobody's watching, when nobody's listening.
Exactly.
And like you said, there's so many people out there with huge followings that give terrible advice. I had someone reach out to me not too long ago. They sent me a message on LinkedIn they were and I went and looked up their Twitter. They had like 25,000 followers or something. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's pretty good. Yeah. And I clicked on their profile, and they were a quote life coach, and they were 24 years old. And I was thinking, what do you know about life at 24 years old? Not to dish life coaches or anything like that, but it's just one of those things where, and I looked at their advice, and it was just like they had copied and pasted a whole bunch of inspirational memes into their feeds. It was nothing that they really lived, that they could really tell you. Yep. And I think you're absolutely right. It's not about the size of your audience. I've gotten some great advice from people that don't even have a Twitter profile.
Mm-hmm. No, that's spot on. And I think that also goes back to the type of mentors you need. Sometimes, there are people that can mentor you on the size of your platform. But again, people that can nourish your character, your integrity, your consistency, your sensitivity to people, because you can talk a whole lot, but a lot of us can stop learning how to listen and how to contextualize the message for the audience. People that can put that in you, because part of what happens is, we know that everything happens for a reason as people of faith. If God is not giving you the size of the platform and the spotlight, then he's maybe giving you some time to work on some other things that'll be really difficult to perfect when there are a bunch of people that are hanging on every word. And so that sometimes can be a blessing, because when your platform gets bigger, it's almost like when a budget gets bigger. If you can't handle a small budget, then a big budget is just a lot more zeros to get yourself in trouble. So work out those things when you've got the smaller resources, the smaller platform. What does your relationship with your wife look like? Which speaking engagements do I take? Which travel engagements do I take? Work that out now so that as you grow, your wife is not left in the dust, your kids are not wanting for a father, and you've done it in a way that can be sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I've had people tell me before, like, "Oh, I wouldn't be so stressed out if I had, more money and stuff." I said, "No, you'd be more stressed out if you had more money, because you got more to manage."
Right.
It's not as easy as you think. You think you have more money, so you have less bills, but typically what happens is you buy more stuff and you have more bills.
Overhead.
And I think one of the things you said that I've always liked this quote that says sometimes your letdown is actually a setup for something greater.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exactly what can happen when you're not. When you're always worried about that next thing and not really being present in where you're at today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've had a really good conversation. Do you have any outgoing advice for people that maybe they're in that same kind of role where they have two careers, or kind of a bi career person? I don't know how to say that. Like
bivocational.
Bivocational. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You saved me on that one. But let's say they have two different roles. And what kind of advice would you have for those? Because I've had some people that says, you need to keep it separated. You need to completely, not merge them together. I've had other people that says, you got to be open. You got to put them together. What is your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think you need to be professional. And, again, as people of faith, the reality is the Bible directs us to do our work as unto the Lord. So being excellent, no matter the size of your audience or platform, I think is biblical. And so I think that applies to both. Don't use your faith as an excuse to not be excellent at work. If anything, be excellent at work so that you have a platform to share your faith, if it comes to that, right? Not to do things that are untimely, but for people to be like, man, John, you were killing it. Like, how are you doing that? You're performing so well at work. Your wife seems really happy. Your kids are well behaved. How are you making all this work? And, it's not about me. God has given me wisdom in how to use the same 24 hours that you do. And it's about, I think, allowing, again, things to be consistent, because where you don't have to turn one persona off and on, I can't be Bruce Wayne at work and Batman at church. I'm one person all the time. And there are different aspects of that come out. And so if I'm learning something in one arena, I hope to employ that in another, or vice versa. I think people can respect that. I think they can respect where you're transparent around, these are the things that I can or cannot do. One thing that I tried to make really plain to all the folks that I work with: I will work hard. I don't mind working early or late. But my coworkers, current and former, also know that Sundays are non-negotiable for me. Going to church, serving in church, serving my congregation is something that is non-negotiable. I will do my best to back up my teammates, but they respect the fact that I'm not going to do things during those times, but before or after that, I'll give them whatever they need. And I think that even if they don't necessarily share my faith, they can respect my faith, and they can respect the fact that my faith is not an excuse to not be a good teammate. So
yeah, I think that's good.
So the I guess what I would conclude with is your faith or your identity as a Christian, or however you identify yourself, that should not be an excuse for you to not do that first relationship well. I should be a good neighbor, a good coworker, a good cousin or friend or whatever. And people should almost be like, if they find out you're a person of faith, or they find out you're a pastor, it shouldn't be, really, I didn't see that coming. It should be, you know what? That kind of makes sense. When I look at the sum total of how our interactions have been, you didn't beat me over the head with that, but you know what? You're the type of person I'd want to have a relationship with. I could see myself going to your church. You're the type of person I could ask questions about the Bible to, because I like the way you relate to me as X, right? As a neighbor, as a coworker. You treated me fairly, and we had integrity. I can work with that.
I think that's really good advice, and I definitely see that. And I agree with you 100%. I don't think I think you should have integrity. You should be open about it, and it should be obvious if you're a man of faith that you know that's part of your life. You don't separate those things. What I found is it's hard enough for me to maintain, myself being real and genuine. I couldn't imagine having to have a fake self and a real self.
It's too hard, too much work.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I really appreciate having you on. It's been great. How can people learn more about or read up on some of your articles? You've written some great stuff on LinkedIn and learn more about your company and your church.
Thank you. So again, first, John, thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate the questions and the opportunity just to share a little bit about my journey so far. So my company is at CloudGenera.com. We're a cloud computing analytics company. We kind of help people figure out not just what they need to buy, but what they need to change to maximize their technology investments. And then my church, Wellspring Church, is a small gospel-centered, diverse church in South Charlotte. We're not huge. We're about 150 people, but we're half and half black and white. And we're very encouraged about the fact that everybody's welcome there. So we love the fact that we've got interracial families. We've got, families of one race that have adopted kids of another race. And they feel like we want our kids to see people, men and women, doing life together, not tolerating each other, but loving and caring for each other. So wellspringchurchnc.org is our church. CloudGenera.com is our company. And you can find a lot of the articles I've written either on LinkedIn or on the resources site for CloudGenera.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate having you on.
Thank you, John. Have a wonderful day.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation that I had with Bobby Allen. And I want to ask everybody just to head on over to geekleader.com and click on the subscribe button and subscribe to your favorite podcast player if you haven't already. And if you do listen through iTunes, if you would, just head over to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. That'd be awesome. We've had some really good ones, and I may start reading some of those on the air because they've been pretty inspiring and keeping me motivated to continue this podcast and continue to reach out to these guests and have these great guests on the show. So head on over to geekleader.com, subscribe, leave a rating and review. That would be awesome. Thanks so much.